is Laura, and this is my Turning the Book on its Head project. This project concerns identifying single stories, which are stories that reiterate stereotypes and assumptions about a particular group of people. I'm also going to be discussing the concept of counter stories, which are stories which reflect experiences of people whose stories are not usually told or counteract the assumptions within single stories. The book I have chosen to explain is Marcello in the Real World by Francisco X. Stork. Within this novel, a boy named Marcello lives a comfortable life working on a ranch that caters to his Asperger's-like syndrome. He finds comfort in helping the horses at the ranch, engaging in philosophical religious studies, and listening to classical music on CDs. He also has a special gift of being able to hear music nobody else can hear. He's happy and comfortable until his father gets Marcello an internship at his law firm and is delved into the real world. Marcello must navigate the real world with his coworker Jasmine and learn how to live outside of his life on the ranch and gain new life skills. With Jasmine, he uncovers a mystery at the law firm concerning his dad while dealing with other coworkers who do not understand his condition. The point that I would like to argue today is that some of the coworkers and people Marcello encounters in the real world create single stories about people with disabilities. However, Marcello and the people who are close to him try to counteract these stories, thus creating counter stories and revealing the depth of Marcello. For my multimodal project, I decided to make a CD that draws upon symbols and passages that reveals my argument of the characters creating single encounter stories. On page 92, Marcello says, "CDs, I never seem to have enough of them." So I thought it would be suiting to have the project reflect his interests. On the front of the CD, I have a horse listening to music while wearing a cross. All three of these symbols represent Marcello's special interest. Marcello knows a lot about horses from his time on the ranch. And much like the horses there, Marcello is also confined on the ranch until his father presents him with an opportunity to discover the real world, which is an example of his father taking Marcello out of his comfort zone and creating a counter story for him. The earbuds in this picture represent Marcello's knowledge of classical music, in which he spends tremendous detail listening to each of the instruments in the orchestra. On page 279, Marcello's rabbi friend, Rabbi Heschel, explains to him how music is like faith and helps guide people in times of trouble, which leads me to the cross symbol in this photo. Marcello also takes comfort in religion and is eager to learn biblical passages and find the philosophy behind them. When my CD is opened, it reveals a picture of a brain with music notes. This shows that there is always activity in Marcello's brain. He counteracts the single stories of how people with disabilities are slow thinkers or don't think at all. On page 124, Marcello thinks aloud in his head. "My head feels full, as if Wendell's words are food that my brain is unable to digest." Wendell later says on the page, "Marcello, Marcello, do you always have to think so much about things? I'll break it down for you, step by step." Just because Marcello takes a long time to think doesn't mean he isn't processing anything. He just thinks differently so he can properly articulate his point of view. We see he is consistently and constantly demonstrating critical thought. His thoughts are counter stories within themselves. On the back of my CD, I have a track list. The A-side tracks represent single stories, and the B-side track list represents counter stories. In the A-side track, we have Arturo, his father. On page 54, in a conversation between Jasmine and Marcello, Jasmine says, "Your father said you had some kind of cognitive disorder." And Marcello thought, "It surprises me to hear Arturo refer to me that way." Even though Arturo helped Marcello create a counter story in the real world, he still slipped up by calling his son names to his coworkers. It came across as very rude and hurtful to Marcello. Next on the track list is Stephen Holmes and Wendell, who both referred to Marcello as Forrest Gump. Stephen Holmes said on page 65 to Marcello, "Sit down, Gump. I'll be right with you." Forrest Gump's story was fantastic, but Mr. Holmes was rude to produce a single story that everyone with a disability is the same. Then there's the secretary, Juliet. On page 60, she says, "He's not here to do dummy work," in which Marcello narrates, "She looks at me when she says the last two words." She produces a single story that people with disabilities are dumb. For my B-side track list, I have Jonah, a childhood friend of Jasmine, who says on page 239, "Jasmine needs someone smart like her. Someone like you." He recognizes that Marcello is smart, which counteracts Juliet's single story. Marcelo is very knowledgeable. In fact, he's an expertise in many fields, as shown on the front of my CD. Next, Marcelo talks about Rabbi Heschel on page 115. He says, "I can tell she enjoys my questions, especially the hard ones. This implies that maybe other people don't take the time to sit down and talk to him and enjoy his questions. She obviously enjoys spending time with her, and they both produce conversation that makes the other person think." Last, on page 260, Jasmine says to Marcelo, "I wanted you to see it. You'll always be welcomed here." She invited Marcelo to her childhood home and becomes close friends with him. This is a counter story that demonstrates that people with disabilities are great and can be friends with anyone and everyone. Jasmine appreciates him for who he is. Overall, I had lots of fun producing this project about Marcelo in the real world. At first, I was challenged and intimidated by creating a project in an MP4 format, which I am an amateur at, but I conquered it and it helped me think about the book in a different way. I was able to pick out symbols that I recognized throughout the novel and critically think about their meaning. I liked being able to visually show what I learned through the symbols and quotes I picked out. I realize I have a knack for hands-on learning now. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I highly recommend this book.